The other half of the argument from silence is in regards to the Bishop of Rome being Peter's successor. Proponents of this view often demand a New Testament reference that explicitly names Peter as the Bishop of Rome and later bishops of Rome as Peter's successors. This one explicit, inarguable verse doesn't exist, and so they feel justified discounting the Catholic claims regarding the papacy. While some may point to the silence of Scripture regarding Peter's presence in Rome, a compelling circumstantial case emerges through the movements of John Mark. The New Testament reveals Mark as a shared apostolic resource, acting as a bridge between the ministries of Paul and Peter in the capital city. In his first Roman imprisonment, in approximately 60-62 AD, Paul records Mark's presence and their reconciliation, Colossians 4, verse 10. Shortly thereafter, Peter, writing from Babylon, which is a widely used early Christian symbol for Rome, identifies Mark as his son, suggesting a deep formative role as Peter's assistant and scribe, 1 Peter 5, verse 13. Finally, in his second and terminal Roman imprisonment, approximately 66-67 AD, Paul specifically requests that Timothy bring Mark back to him, noting he is useful for ministry, 2 Timothy 4, verse 11. These three converging data points place Mark in Rome during the exact window of Peter's traditional ministry. It suggests that Peter and Paul were not leading separate rival factions, but were operating a unified apostolic mission in the heart of the empire, with Mark serving as the common link. If Mark is with Peter in Babylon and Mark is concurrently summoned to Paul's side in Rome, the simplest geographical and logical conclusion is that Peter was indeed presiding over the Roman Church during the dawn of the first imperial persecutions. The convergence of Paul's final request for Mark in Rome and Peter's identification of Mark in Babylon provides a scriptural triangulation that later historical testimony strongly corroborates. The two pillars of the church were martyred in the same city, leaving behind a single unified apostolic see. But even putting inference aside, it's a matter of historical fact that no one prior to the 16th century Protestant Reformation seriously doubted or called into question the Bishop of Rome being Peter's successor. We have extraordinarily early, widespread, and consistent testimony from multiple regions of the empire that Peter and Paul were associated with Rome and that Rome holds a unique apostolic inheritance. Writings from every corner of the empire, Irenaeus from Gaul, Clement of Rome, Ignatius of Antioch, Tertullian from Africa, and Origen from Egypt, all taking it as a settled, uncontroversial fact that Peter and Paul founded the church in Rome and that the line of bishops followed them. In the first millennium of Christianity, there was no anti-Petron school of history. Even those who fiercely disagreed with the Pope's jurisdiction, like the Eastern Orthodox after 1054, never disputed the Bishop of Rome was the successor of Peter. The patriarchs of Constantinople, Antioch, and Alexandria often fought with Rome over power. However, they always addressed the Bishop of Rome as sitting in the apostolic see, or the chair of Peter. Their argument was, you have the authority of Peter, but you're using it wrong. Not, you aren't actually Peter's successor. This is getting more so into the realm of the historical case for the papacy, which we will treat more fully later in the series, so I digress for now. There's another grave inconsistency in the proponents of the argument from silence, since Scripture is also silent on the canon of Scripture. There is no verse that lists which books belong or don't belong in the New Testament. If we accept the succession of books based on the authority of the early church, we must logically accept the succession of persons that same church identified. And in the case of some books like Hebrews, Revelation, James, and 2 Peter, the unanimity of the church's testimony of the Bishop of Rome being Peter's successor is greater than those books which have since been received as legitimate. Also, if the keys were returned to Christ at the death of Peter, rather than passing on to his successor, then Christ's promise to give the keys to the church's foundation was a temporary loan for a temporary foundation that ceased to exist the moment the church actually began to grow and face universal crisis. The keys of the kingdom are Davidic imagery for a dynastic office, Isaiah 22. In the Davidic kingdom, when the prime minister died, the keys didn't vanish. They were passed to the next successor because the house remained. The office exists for the sake of the house, not the man. And so we can see there's no evidence in Scripture which supports a negative answer to the 4 litmus tests. However, a lack of positive proof of a negative is not necessarily in and of itself positive proof of a positive. That would be called the you lose so I win fallacy. So now let's turn our attention to the scriptural proof affirming a positive answer to the 4 litmus tests. Tune in for part 7. Thank you for listening, and may God bless you.